First of all, it really is exciting to be back at my alma mater. It was IU in Bloomington, but you're all part of the same system, and a place that hosted me in 2008 as a visiting scholar for a wonderful interaction with what was then the center. I think we're very excited about what Sharek and his colleagues are planning to do, and we thank you for bringing us all together. This initiative brings to mind an earlier attempt on the part of the Center on Philanthropy and my center at the American University in Cairo that began in 2008 and lasted until roughly the revolution in 2011 in Egypt, to build a network of scholars and practitioners with an interest in Muslim philanthropy. And then a little bit more ambitiously to even think about perhaps networking academic institutions with that kind of interest. And since that work is currently dormant and ran into some pretty significant challenges along the way, I thought it was a good moment to reflect about what went wrong, what we could have done better, and what you might now do to build upon this base that we had started. And while I say that the network itself is dormant, it is a fact that a digital library that we began in cooperation with IUPUI here does still remain on the AUC portal called DAR, and you can visit that and see what kind of materials we had been able to collect from around the Muslim majority country regions before the project was stopped. Why is this important? I'm a real believer that networks are part of the way the world is going to move forward increasingly in our digitized age. And I think Maria's descriptions of how networks are working effectively for the most part in Asia is a nice counterpoint to what I'd like to say today. Some of my other research has been on how social movements and networks among youth have sparked some of the more hopeful aspects of the Arab Spring, and also how civic movements are increasingly finding that this idea of collaboration in which you don't merge your logos and everyone has to get on the same page, but we work collectively and in parallel to solve big problems, just seems to me to be the way forward and something that we should reflect upon together. The one-sentence conclusion I have about our earlier endeavor is this: gathering individual scholars together was relatively easy. We had approximately 140, including many of you in this room, with people like Amy and Patrick and Dwight as early members of the Muslim Philanthropy Network. Not all of them were fully engaged, but many of them were very excited about sharing their research in progress, documentation, and others. But it was much, much harder to get institutions, academic institutions, to be willing to sign on to any kind of collaborative work around the topic of Muslim philanthropy. And I'd like to take a little bit of time to think with you about why that was and what it says about this interplay between politics, faith, and giving in the world that we're currently living in today. The challenges were in part, of course, related to funding. So I want to get that out of the way very quickly. We were fortunate to have some early funding from the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation to bring many of us together in Pocantico, their beautiful conference setting in upstate New York, to hammer out foundational definitions and a mission statement for the network. And that was a very exciting meeting for many of us, and I'd be happy to share the proceedings with any of you that would like to think about some of those ideas further. But we really found a struggle. We had a struggle finding donors who would commit to multi-year funding for something that to them was infrastructure. It wasn't a project. There was no output. There wasn't going to be a conference or a book published. And I think that is typical of where we are as a field. that it's much easier to get foundations to give to a substance area than it is to support us as a field in our growth and emergence. But that shouldn't be a problem for networks, because by definition, a network is a voluntary group of peers that have come together because they have a commitment to something. And usually a network of very committed individuals will be able to overcome lean years with funding and to survive. So I think we need to look a little bit further at what some of these problems were. I should mention before I leave funding that Prince Al Walid Foundation received a very ambitious proposal from us. We didn't want to just have a scholarly network. We really wanted to think about a consortia of universities wherever there were Muslim majority societies in which we might build curriculum together, exchange graduate students, even think about faculty exchanges and joint research. And we spent a lot of time on a proposal, again, which I would be very happy to hand over to the next generation. And if you know anything about the Al Walid Foundation in Saudi Arabia, they give millions of dollars to Harvard, for Middle East studies centers. They've opened American studies centers all over the Middle East. They're used to big institutional engagement with higher education. And after not hearing from them for months and months, we got a one-paragraph letter that said, we're making a $50,000 one-year contribution to the core costs of the Gerhardt Center to move this agenda forward. So thank you, but that really wasn't quite what was needed. IDRC engaged with us more on the ideas. This is the Canadian Development Research Center. They had a digital information program at the time, and they loved the idea of a digitized library, a place that we could make accessible to any scholar or interested person anywhere in the world. Documents from Africa, from the Middle East, from Asia, historical material, interviews. We were hoping we could actually interview philanthropists and have digitized video on this site. And that support was, again, supposed to be for 1 year and hiring a part-time coordinator, but we stretched the money and we did a lot with a little and managed to hire a wonderful coordinator who's known, I think, to many of you, Shaneen Tarabulsi. She had just finished an undergraduate degree at the time, and she's now a PhD in philanthropy from Oxford University, but she really pushed this forward, and she'll be delighted if we're able to revive some of it. So those materials still exist. The portal has been updated and made more user-friendly, and we can talk about how to access that later. I want to mention a little bit, in order to engage more deeply in what kind of problems we encountered, what seems to me to be a difference between the current Middle East, by which I mean the Arab-speaking countries, Turkey and Iran, and the places in Asia where we heard about certainly obstacles to collaboration, but not the kind of resistance that we faced. Patrick, Dwight, myself, Bill Plater, and a few others made a pretty extensive trip to Turkey as part of this initiative. And we visited all of the universities where we had contacts with provosts, presidents, faculty members, and where there had been interest and participation up until now in programs here at the Center on Philanthropy. We were probably too ambitious to think that we could sell this idea of a consortia on a first visit, but we didn't even get a glimmer of interest from any of these institutional leaders. And faculty members, if anything, were even more suspicious of the initiative than were their academic administrators. And what I think we all need to remember is that we're in the midst of a really cataclysmic struggle to define the relationship of faith to giving in these Muslim-identified communities. Today, it's much clearer with the emergence of Daesh, with the Burkini, Burkini policing problems in France, that this is a huge conflict that surrounds identity, politics, power, militancy, and perhaps this is why it has become so emotive. But back in 2008, when we visited Turkey and some Egyptian universities, these debates and their conflicts were much less clearly drawn. So it took us kind of a while to become educated about what was going on. But it became very clear that there was a subtext in every conversation we had about this consortium and its goals. And it was that we were using code. We weren't really interested in the practices of faith and giving, but this was some kind of wolf in sheep's clothing that was going to insert political Islam into faculties or curricula of the university. And at that point, if you remember, in Turkey, the AKP had been in power just long enough for people in liberal, independent academic organizations to begin to have a sense about what this might mean for their institutions. So we heard stories on that trip about books that were being banned, that no one without a headscarf could any longer get a job at the Ministry of Higher Education. And there was a visceral sense of the beginning of this struggle between those who defined themselves not as secular necessarily, although obviously Turkey has a very strong Kemalist tradition of secularism, but I would say liberal in the best sense of the word, inclusive, open, ready to consider ideas and then reject them or accept them on their merits, which is something that I think we all hope would characterize all universities everywhere. So we got absolutely nowhere in Turkey. A few years later, it became even more difficult, and I would argue that the word Muslim had become stripped of all of its deeper historical and theological meanings, and it had become a code for something else. And this is a problem that we will have to grapple with as we go forward. Not so much about the people in this room or those that we bring on as junior scholars, and I'm very, very proud of Rahma as a product of the Gerhardt Center. But it is something that we'll have to deal with as we reach out to donors and as we try to make the good research and the good products of our work more accessible to others. I will just skip over very quickly some other ideas that we can talk about later, but just to say that it wasn't a question of wordsmithing. We sat down at the Gerhardt Center and spent several weeks coming up with an alternative to Muslim Philanthropy Network that was the network of philanthropy in Muslim majority communities and their diaspora. So it was a mouthful, it was kind of off-putting, and it didn't really change the terms of this problem that I'm talking about. Going forward, I think that we have to confront this, not ignore it, but we have to move beyond it. We sat in Turkey and listened to two sides of a story, both of which had some valid points, and both of which were very unnecessarily paranoid about the other. And instead of engaging in Turkey, and instead of engaging in Egypt, we've continued along these polarized lines. And I think that a convening like this could be one of the places where we begin to get beyond it. Thank you very much.